Hello there. Welcome to the Transforming Trauma Podcast, a complex trauma podcast from the NARM Training Institute. My name is Sarah Buino, and I'm a psychotherapist in Chicago and currently a NARM student, and I'm so excited to share this podcast with you all. Transforming Trauma is presented by the NARM Institute. The Institute offers NARM practitioner trainings for mental health professionals who are looking for an advanced training in complex post-traumatic stress disorder. The neuroaffective relational model is a cutting-edge, innovative approach for resolving CPTSD, addressing attachment, development, relational, and intergenerational trauma. During this unprecedented time of our world dealing with COVID-19, we are grateful to have come together with so many of you for the recent NARM online community gatherings, and we're looking forward to our next free community gathering on May 14th. These events focus on how we can stay emotionally healthy during this time of isolation and are great opportunities to engage with the NARM material and the NARM community. We've made the replay videos from all these events available on our website so that you can access them even after the events have occurred. We hope that these are useful resources for you during this time. Please go to www.narmtraining.com/events to sign up for the replay videos. Today, we have a really special episode for you. One of the really amazing things about the NARM community is the way that they view connection and value that connection, and not only the way they view and value it, but the way that they live it. So Brad Kammer, who is the lead trainer in North America, reached out to myself and to some of the other leaders in the NARM community and wanted to have a conversation about how we're supporting each other and ourselves during this time, during the pandemic. So let me introduce you to our three guests today. Marcia Black is a licensed clinical psychologist, NARM senior training assistant, and NARM faculty committee member. Marcia has been in private practice for over 35 years in the San Francisco and East Bay area, specializing in treating complex and developmental trauma and other psychological conditions, including depression, loss, anxiety, relationship issues, and addiction. Stefanie Klein is a licensed clinical social worker, somatic experiencing practitioner, NARM master therapist, consultant, and faculty member. She spent 22 years in her Los Angeles private practice, specializing in treating adults with trauma and anxiety disorders. For the past decade, she's had the distinct privilege of being mentored by Dr. Lawrence Heller, founder of the neuroaffective relational model. Stefanie has been honored to assist Dr. Heller in all of the U.S. NARM practitioner trainings. And finally, Brad Kammer, who you've heard from before on this podcast. He's a licensed marriage and family therapist and professional clinical counselor. Brad is trained as a somatic psychotherapist and has studied under and taught with his mentor, Dr. Lawrence Heller, for many years, and is deeply inspired by the neuroaffective relational model. Brad is a NARM master therapist, consultant, faculty trainer, teaching NARM and working with complex trauma internationally. So please enjoy our conversation. Hello, friends. Welcome to Transforming Trauma. We have a host of NARM faculty today. I'm so excited to chat with you. Brad had reached out to all of us and said he wanted to do an episode about what we're seeing with clients and as people who are holding space for therapists, how it's affecting everybody right now during the pandemic. So hello to Brad, Stefanie, and Marcia. Welcome.
Hi.
Yeah, it's great to be here. Great to be with all of you. And we're excited, Sarah, that we can have this conversation and hopefully be a support to folks that are listening.
Absolutely. So let's see, who wants to start? I'm going to start with Marcia. Are you noticing any themes with clients during this time? And if so, what are you noticing?
Well, the themes of connection and disconnection we work a lot with in NARM, and of course, they're most poignant right now at this time. One of the things I've noticed is that because of some of the changes in people's circumstances, their sense of connection to how they take themselves to be, their identity, is really being challenged. If they're not working or their roles are changing, it can really raise these issues of who am I if I'm not the breadwinner, or I'm not the caregiver, or I'm not the star performer. And for some people, it's extremely painful, frightening, even a sense of loss. And at the same time, it can also open up the possibility of a more authentic connection to who they might want to be or what might be underneath that. I've seen also the flip side where for some people, it's actually freeing. to not have to be in those identifications and to see what might arise for them. It's almost like a relief. And still, from the same place, it gives them an opportunity to rethink and explore in the work who might they want to be going forward, not just now in this time of crisis, but as their life unfolds further beyond it. So that's certainly one thing I've seen a lot of. People's strategies not working in the way they used to, and challenging some of the ways they've come to think of themselves, the way they've got their self-worth, and finding other ways that are meaningful to them as those fall away.
Yeah, Stefanie, I saw you nodding along as Marcia was talking. Do you want to add to that?
Yeah, I mean, I feel exactly how Marcia feels. There's something very transformational. That was the word that was coming up for me that I'm seeing. And as we know from working with developmental trauma and post-traumatic growth, transformation is not always very comfortable. So I'm definitely seeing this fluctuation between relief and then discomfort. But the theme that I see developing is a lot of transformation. People really asking themselves that question of what's it going to be like when I come out of here, and what if I don't want it to be the same way? And that's kind of a beautiful thing. The other thing that I'm seeing a lot is how the absence of what everybody calls FOMO, how the absence of of anybody being out there doing anything is setting some conditions for people to relate to themselves in a different way. That's kind of been more of the upside. And I've been seeing a lot of relief, and people can relate to themselves in a more of an I'm okay way, because that's just not in the atmosphere right now. We're all stuck at home.
Yeah. Brad, do you have anything to add?
I think this is great. I mean, I piggyback off of both Marcia and Stefanie. The two themes I was thinking about before we started our call was about grief, which I think Marcia touched on, and also as part of the transformation process that Stefanie was talking about, is that there is loss. I mean, our life will never be the same as what it was before, and there's both positive and negative of that. And we have this kind of real challenge or opportunity right now to realize what are the pieces that are important to us that we want to try to maintain or create moving forward, and what are some of the pieces that actually were in our way and causing kind of unnecessary distress for us in the past. So I just think about that a lot, of how people are getting this opportunity to really slow down and look at themselves in a way that is very challenging. Because, like I said, these losses are huge for people, and it brings up not just present day grief, but it triggers all this kind of past loss that a lot of us haven't fully processed. And then the other thing I've really noticed is just like the appreciation that people have of these small little connections. Like right now, I mean, I'm with two of my, old dear friends, and Sarah, getting to know you in a deeper way. And it's just these moments of connection that we often take for granted have been really special. And, I love hearing these stories or seeing these stories online about these connections between someone and their postman, or someone in the grocery clerk or something. These are these moments of connection that we often take for granted. And, I know the media tends to focus on all the moments of conflict, but there's so many moments happening that I think is different, and it brings me back to experiences I've had working in environments where there was environmental catastrophe or the war situations. And, we are going through that, and it does open up this possibility of reconnecting in new ways. And I find that really exciting to be part of.
And that leads to the next question, essentially, of how are you caring for yourselves while you're also holding distress for your clients and other people that you might be caring for?
Well, I'm getting a COVID puppy today.
What? Jealous? I have been trying so hard, but I digress. I'm so excited
I've been
for you.
trying for a long time too.
Oh, wow.
But, it kind of makes me think about what Brad was talking about, the whole globe is grieving and we're all dealing with loss. And in NARM, we look at grief as a state that connects us to our heart. Primary grief is a heartful state. And I'm definitely finding, and I think part of the reason people are so thirsty for puppies right now is because our hearts are really holding a lot and wanting to open to and love. I mean, because we're grieving. It makes perfect sense to me. I'm also personally finding, this is kind of not answering your question, but it's a little tangential. I'm finding that my felt senses are more available to me. And maybe that's one of the ways that I'm adapting and caring for myself in a different way, is that I'm noticing, like Brad was talking about, these little moments of connection. I'm noticing more tenderness. I'm literally noticing roses and commenting on them when I walk. It's like there's something becoming available to me in a very organic way. So I'm not really efforting to care for myself in an enormously different way, other than being very gentle and kind to myself, not putting pressure on myself to like write a novel because we're in quarantine. But I am noticing organically what shows up that is more available to me. And, in NARM, we do a lot of noticing and not a lot of efforting or willing to get someplace. And I think that I'm dropping deeper into myself as a way of taking care of myself.
That's interesting. What that's bringing to mind for me is I'm noticing both for myself and for clients and my staff is the ways that we've taken care of ourselves seem to be deepening, and the ways that we harm ourselves seem to be deepening in some ways.
Well, yeah, it can go both ways. I mean, people are drinking more, people are needing to get away from themselves, people are having very intense couples dynamics, stuck 24/7 with each other. There's acting out going on and acting in for sure.
Yeah, I was thinking about like specifically being a therapist. It's really interesting, this whole idea that, of course, we talk a lot about in NARM of not putting so much pressure on ourselves, not efforting in the way that is we're so identified with, both as individuals and as society. But there is absolutely nothing that I can do to solve these huge issues. And there's something about surrender. I know these kind of words can start to sound a little spiritual or something, but there is something about, when you're someone like myself that, is used to putting a lot of pressure on yourself and you're faced with something that you absolutely cannot do anything about, then there is a way that, you're invited to really just let go of it. And so when clients want you to kind of join with them to try to solve these issues or figure things out or fix things, it's like that isn't even an option right now. The option available to us is how do we stay as connected to ourselves as possible while we're going through this. And I said this on I can't remember if it was a webinar we did or another podcast I did, but I'm not I don't like to fly that much. I get nervous, when I fly a lot. But there's this moment when the captain comes on, the pilot comes on and says that we're about to hit some bad turbulence for the next 20 minutes, that I actually find that I surrender. And it's the interesting thing. It's like I'm braced. And then as soon as they say that there's going to be this turbulence, it's like I just am like, okay, I have absolutely no control. And there's something about that experience that feels like it's happening to me right now. And I think it actually allows me to create a lot more space for my clients as well, not just for myself, but for my clients. I can really just show up more about how do we stay connected to ourselves through this time of turbulence.
I was thinking about this question in relationship to my actual experience with my clients. And one of the things that came up for me early on was, I have my own boundaries around my exposure to news. So I'm sitting with my clients who, especially the first couple of weeks, I didn't have control over what they chose to share with me of the news that they were consuming. And so the challenge of like, how do I sit with them as they're talking about all of this and also attend to myself? And one of the things I love about this approach is the emphasis it puts on the relational dynamic between what's going on with me and the client and also staying with myself. And one of the things that was super helpful for me was to remember that the important thing was my connection to them and how they were relating to the news and what it was like for them to be hearing this and even letting them take a little time to see how it was affecting them. Because I know part of what was going on, I was feeling a little flooded by it, but I also imagined that they might be too in a way that they weren't aware of. So staying more present, not to the content, but to the process of what was going on in their relationship to news and what they wanted out of the sharing of it helped me gain a little distance from it. And, there are times sometimes when if we're sitting there as therapists and something like that is happening, we might even need to say, I'm noticing right now that I'm having this experience and I'm wondering what it's like for you, and maybe even just slowing it down, because there's modeling there too of the ability to reflect on my experience. And often, not only am I supporting their kind of reflecting on their own experience, but also the relational piece of we're in this together. This is a collaboration.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not, sitting there, delivering something to them. We're exploring the landscape together. And so staying with my own experience and being able to bring it in when it was relevant really helped me with that, because otherwise I would have been on overload that first week with all that people were talking about.
And that just reminded me of a theme that my staff have been really complaining to me about, really. And I'm curious from a NARM perspective how you all would hold this. And I have found too, for some of my clients, the resistance to doing what we would call the work and wanting to spend more time venting or just chit-chatting, essentially, and I'm curious from a NARM perspective how we might hold that, because we want to recognize what the client wants for themselves, and if they're expressing a desire to kind of stay on a surface level, that's information communicated. Brad, do you want to comment on that?
Yeah, I mean, I'm not sure so much from a NARM perspective, but from me as a therapist perspective, it's like what the client wants to use their time is a really important place to start. And it's not about my agenda about how they use it. So if they want to use it to explore deeper themes, then we have a great model for working with that. But if they're, a lot of people are really lonely, are very isolated, and they do just find deep value of having someone that can really truly listen to them and not interject all of their own stuff like some of our friends, because we have these more intimate relationships and stuff. So there's something about coming to a therapist and just having space held for you that can be incredibly enriching, particularly in a time like this where people are isolated and disconnected. So really, I guess it is kind of a NARM thing too, is we really start with just what would be most useful for them. And sometimes what I find is that it starts with more of just kind of the connection. And then as they get some of the connection that they want, then it starts to surface some of these deeper themes. And then, we talk about how we call it recontracting in NARM. It's just basically, okay, these themes are emerging for you. Would it be useful for us to explore these together? And so that's kind of how I hold it. I'd be curious, Marcia and Stefanie too. But
Yeah, Stefanie was nodding emphatically.
Yeah. Yeah. Because I was thinking that, when people are talking and sharing, but whether it's news stories or whatever, in NARM, we learn to listen and attune not to the content anyway.
Right.
Like we're listening to the content, we're paying attention, but we're really tuning in on a much deeper level to the themes underneath the content all the time. Mm-hmm. So I've found that people often do want to start that way, or they want to ask how I am more than usual.
Yeah.
That's another thing I'm seeing more of. But whatever it is, wherever we start, that as long as I keep attuning to the themes that are showing up underneath the content, something always arises that is deeper. Mm-hmm. I don't think I've had one session yet during this time that didn't happen, even if that's where people wanted to start.
And that actually brings up a question for me about self-disclosure. Are you using self-disclosure differently now than you might in other times, Marcia?
It's interesting. I was thinking about the question, that you raised just a minute ago, and how, when a client comes and starts with those things, that in a way, there's something really important about acknowledging that those experiences have happened in the last week, and that I've experienced them too. And even to be able to respond by saying, it feels like it's been a long time since we've seen each other, doesn't it? I mean, there's a level of disclosure that is related to, the kind of immediacy of our experience, because sometimes I think that's part of what the chatting, so to speak, is about, is just coming back together, because so much is happening so fast. It feels like, and I've said to clients, it does feel like it's been longer than a week, doesn't it? What's that like to be here after all those things have happened? And I'm really noticing it too, and wanting to fill in the connection. So indeed, that's certainly a part of how I might respond to that in the beginning, and then to look at how it is to be together during this time, and ways in which maybe I feel touched by things that they're sharing or that are meaningful to me. Or as I said before, sometimes even being able to acknowledge that, sometimes it's a lot even to process from my side as I'm sitting with them and trying to help them hold it. So certainly on that level, it's really been a kind of a poignant time in that way. And there's a lot of kind of tender interactions where I feel like my own heart is really open in the interaction, maybe even more than it usually is.
I think Marcia brought this up in another one of our community get-togethers, that there is like a different kind of intimacy that's happening right now because we're in each other's homes on Zoom. We're like my clients are in my bedroom. My desk is my bed. And although I try to not show anything, I'm also in their bedrooms and their kids are running in and out. And Marcia, you brought this up and I thought it was such a great point that there's a kind of a sweetness and an intimacy, and you can kind of resist that, or you can kind of just, like Brad was saying before, surrender the fact that it is different. And the model we use in healing developmental trauma is one that's about being present and being connected to ourselves. And so I think it's so important to be able to be organic in following that difference. I've never been somebody, even prior to learning NARM, that was really super intensely boundaried, like old school boundaried, that would not answer a question. But I think there's an uptick in my availability with that. We're in this together. We're experiencing the same thing. And there's no reason to act otherwise.
Yeah.
And I would add that, when a client asks, how are you in this context? I mean, there's something really real about that I feel, again, moved, even as I say that, to respond to, like, of course they want to know I'm okay.
Right.
Because a lot of people aren't. And so to kind of hold that too and be able to respond to that in an authentic way feels really meaningful to me.
I just love the question. I love listening to these answers because I think, the three of us, and I think, Sarah, you're probably really similar to this too, but the three of us are really authentic in how we show up with our clients. And I think that's why we've gravitated to this model, because the model is not steps and protocols. It's really about how we hold space, like Stefanie said, how we show up in our own hearts. And whether we disclose personal information or not, that's kind of secondary. But primary is that they feel that we're fully human and that we're fully with them, or as much as we can be with them. And I haven't noticed any difference in myself and how I actually am in terms of disclosure. But I do, like I was saying before, and I think Marcia just said really nicely before too, I do feel like the quality of connection is different. And there's less taking for granted. Oh, I'll see you next week, And it's like, well, there's something really precious because our client might not talk to someone for the next week. And then they come back and reconnect with us. And it's like these moments of connection are so precious. So I never have been someone, like Stefanie was saying, that is not authentic in my therapy. And I actually don't so much like that or appreciate that. And, there's always boundaries around that, of course. But I mean, even here, just our clients could be listening to our podcast and, hearing about Stefanie's working on her bed and her puppy.
Right.
I'm afraid of flying, Marcia's, just worked out. I mean, we're all just showing up. And I think that's part of not putting so much pressure on ourselves, that even the helpers, the people that are guiding them, we are also humans with our own challenges from our own developmental issues, and that we can be good at what we do because of it, because we actually are taking a look at it. And it's one of the things I just wanted to point out for myself is like what's helping me kind of get through this time to be a therapist is that I have learned to continue to practice not using my strategies as much to run away from myself. And the more I stay connected to myself, and then I can track when I'm using strategies, the more that helps me to stay present. Well, that's what every client is doing and struggling with right now. So I can relate to it. I can totally relate to the client that's downing too much whiskey at night because, they're alone and don't want to feel those feelings. Like I can relate to all of the different strategies people are using. And I think that's the disclosure, so to speak, that allows us, like Marcia said, to really connect on a relational model, relational way.
Yeah. And I'm just thinking of therapists who are going to listen to this and how comforted they're going to be in hearing you all be so authentic and honest. And so that sort of leads into the next question. Since you do all provide support for therapists who are training in NARM, how are you supporting them in working with their clients' increased level of distress right now?
I mean, I think probably the most useful thing that I have offered to the students that I work with or therapists I consult with really is this piece about staying connected to themselves in the work and to tracking their own experience with their clients and to be able to attend to that even as they're tending to their clients. I mean, in NARM, one of the things we look at is, in our own experience, there may be a reflection of or a resonance with our clients, or it may be something that's coming up for us uniquely that we want to bookmark and set aside. Like if I'm flooded with the news, as I was talking about earlier, I can't be present for my client. And so to encourage that sort of, I guess it's a level of vulnerability with themselves as therapists to be able to acknowledge that sort of, you know what? I wonder how it would be if we just slow down a little bit here, because I want to be able to be really present with what you're going through. And we're moving a little fast here. So can also be so healing for people that your therapist that you're going to isn't up high and above you knowing everything, but also can acknowledge their own limitations. And that's probably the most important thing, because when we start stepping over our own experience in our efforts to be there for our clients, we're not going to be there for our clients. So whether it's in the moment or whether it's, to get consultation later to process some aspect of what came up in the session that might be their own personal fear or, sensitivity, that's just critical to the work in my experience. And I do the same, talk about my cases to my colleagues.
Yeah.
It's one thing that can't be taken away from us is our passion for our work. And so many of us in this profession, a lot of us in this profession have really come into this work, not because we're going to make a ton of money, but because we really care about being there for other people. We care about helping people. We care about learning about people, learning about ourselves, helping ourselves. And this is the field of psychotherapy that we're all part of. And specifically with trauma, about how to, use traumatic experiences, how to support clients moving through traumatic experiences, not just to recover, but to actually support them to move forward in a really positive way in their life. And so I just think that it's a distraction, I guess you would call it, but it's like a part of our craft that in this time we can slow down and really focus on what we love. And so I'm so grateful that I'm in this profession where I get to work with all these people that are really excited about learning about working with trauma. And I know that Stefanie and Marcia, are in the same boat. We work a lot with people that we're consulting with that are doing great work with very complex cases and clients. And there's this shared passion for this field and for this work that we get to join in. So I think that's one thing I like to focus on in terms of supporting the therapists and the students that we work with. And then the other piece is just more of kind of a personal piece. This is all the time, but particularly now, is just if we could be a little kinder to ourselves. And there's so much pressure, like we talked about before, that therapists put on themselves because they care so much, because they want to help so much, that they can demand perfection from themselves. They can really be so harsh towards themselves. And so just bringing this curiosity, bringing this understanding that it's 2 steps forward, 1 step back, that we really are in a very complex profession. And there's many different dynamics around it, and we're doing the best we can, and we're committed to continuing to learn and develop our craft. And so I just try to keep that in the center too, being kind to ourselves, being patient with ourselves, being patient with the process. That feels very important, particularly in this time right now.
I need to say something.
Please, please, please.
Well, because when Brad was talking, all I kept thinking about was the metaphor of a present parent. Just as you were talking, the way you were describing that, I just kept thinking about one of the ways that we support therapists is through kind of this intergenerational model of support where there's mentorship and coaching that comes from this place that had all those wonderful, yummy, calming words that Brad just said, patient and curious and encouraging. And it just those are the conditions that if they were met in early childhood adequately, we wouldn't have had to develop this intense pressure that we put on ourselves or relate to ourselves through shame or self-judgment. So I think that's one of the things that is so important in how we're supporting other therapists right now, is being part of that intergenerational system of being there for each other in true support.
And it's so funny that you said that, because literally as Brad was talking, I was super feeling like a transference dad vibe. And I'm like, but he's not old enough to be my dad.
Right. It doesn't matter.
But we were feeling into that energy. It's so interesting that you say that. Yeah. Brad, do you have any reactions to us parentifying you?
Yes.
Well, it really touches me, not personally necessarily, but because that's really the intention of what we're trying to build in this community, is that people come into our community to get trained clinically in a model, but they're getting so much more out of it. And part of it is what Stefanie just identified, which is that we've all lost what Stefanie shared. We've all lost this way that our grandparents had their parents back. And it's like we've lost that. Our society doesn't support that. Most of our jobs, our bosses don't support that. A lot of our partners, we're not in relationships that we have that support, even in our intimate relationships. So we're really trying to kind of establish those conditions that Stefanie talked about. So it just touches me whenever I hear that, because that is exactly what we're trying to build. And even the podcast is part of that too. It's like we're trying to provide this support for people when they feel like an island out there by themselves, dealing with very difficult situations, whether they're therapists or not therapists, and that they know that there's people like us that are coming together, trying to hold them the best we can. And that there's people that are also holding us when we're struggling as well.
Yeah, there's a meme that I'm loving on Instagram that's essentially like, every therapist has a therapist who has a therapist who has a therapist. And then at the end, it's Fiona Apple, which is not right. Is not right, but I think it's hilarious. and what you said, Brad, it leads to the last question that we had, is any NARM-informed suggestions that you all might have for people who are really looking for that support during this time?
I was thinking about that, and for myself, and that what are some of the ways that I've used NARM, to get through this time in my own way. And the self-inquiry process is so important. When this all first started, and this brings in this psychoeducational piece, which I feel like has been helpful to clients. Sometimes they're hard on themselves because they slip back to, quote, older, strategies that they've already gotten a lot out of the way. And I found that for myself. So I'm like a really responsible kind of, you want me on a desert island if you've just had a shipwreck. So I was with I got the sanitizer, the toilet paper, everything. And I was like, wait a second, this is the way I always used to be. And so I stopped and I reflected on, there's only so much safety you can bring about with hand sanitizer. So I was like, and I have enough now to give to all my friends. So that's but then I thought, what's up with that? Okay, I'm trying to manage these deeper internal feelings that are related to somehow feeling safe. And as I sort of slowed down with all of that, then I could drop into, oh, right. I feel afraid. I feel a need for connection. I don't want to be in it all by myself. So a need for support. And once I was able to drop into that, I realized the true safety doesn't come from the hand sanitizer and the toilet paper. It really comes from being able to listen to yourself deeply. What is it that's arising? In NARM, we talk about feelings as being a communication to the self. And so for me to be able to listen to what I was experiencing, go, oh, that's helping me know what I need. And then to be able to feel more of a sense of kind of the interconnection of the people around me in my life. And even to allow people to go to the grocery store for me and things like that, which normally I would be the one doing that. And I need to be able to let other people do that. So it's interesting, the self-inquiry, the being able to feel the feelings underneath that the strategy was protecting, and then being able to listen to them and see, what are they telling me about what I need? And then to be able to feel the shift of the expansiveness and the more heart connection that I felt to myself, actually, with some sort of self-compassion around that old strategy that came into play, and then to be able to feel the deeper connections to other people from that more authentic place. And I think those processes that we bring in NARM are really helpful.
Absolutely.
Gosh, that was just such a perfect answer. I don't know that I can
Okay,
add
well,
anything.
podcast done.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, the words that come to mind are gentleness and curiosity. I can't add a single thing.
Yeah, I think one thing that Marcia brought up is really important about that we do look at feelings and emotions as signals for something that's like unresolved inside us. And so I'm using this as kind of a psychoeducation piece with a lot of my clients and for myself, which is that when we're feeling anxiety, anxiety is a signal for something internal. Now, I have different choices about what I do with that. Sometimes I might use old strategies like Marcia said and disconnect from it. And sometimes I'm trying to do the best I can to really turn towards it and see what it might be communicating. And so I know that for me, it's often like the things that I'm avoiding are the things that start getting really big and really scary. And then as soon as I am able to really face it, it's like, oh, I can do this. I can do this. And I think about like all the doctors that are putting on their scrubs to go into a 16-hour day. And it's like that moment of like, I can do this. And, I can get through this, and there's going to be costs. There's going to be impact. There definitely will be impact. And luckily we have all these trauma therapists that are ready, with all these wonderful tools to support them. But it's also for us too. It's like that, how do we stay connected to ourselves through all the turbulence? And really going back to what Stefanie said too, is just to be kind with ourselves. We're going to make mistakes. We're going to act out or act in ways that, we're going to feel regretful for. We're going to beat ourselves up in multiple different ways. And that in NARM, we really try to support people to use those experiences, not to shame themselves, but to learn from them about themselves and to learn how they might want to relate to themselves differently, which we call agency in NARM. And so those are kind of some of the pieces that I really am taking for myself and also trying to support those with my clients.
Yeah, Larry often says, though, there's what is, and there's what we do to ourselves with what is, which is just a way that I like to hold on to this concept of agency. And what is super complicated right now.
Mm-hmm.
But even in the most complicated of situations, even a prisoner of war, there's still like space to make choices about some aspect. And that's comforting to me.
Absolutely. Well, thank you all. This has been personally very helpful for me, so I appreciate being able to be a part of it, and I'm sure that our listeners are going to get a lot out of it too. So thank you so much for being with us today.
Thank you. That was fun.
Sarah.
Yeah, and Sarah, we continue to just be so appreciative and grateful for all the work you're doing to help us get this understanding of complex trauma and specifically NARM out into the world. And so we're just so happy you're part of our community. This is a special group you're joining right here. The three of us are very deeply connected. So we're happy that you're joining us, and thanks again for all that you're doing.
Thank you. It's a pleasure and an honor.
Thanks so much for joining us on today's episode. If you want to learn more, you can go to the show notes or visit us at www.narmtraining.com/transformingtrauma. The Transforming Trauma podcast is brought to you by the NARM Training Institute. NARM practitioner trainings for mental health professionals are offered across North America and internationally. We're offering a podcast review giveaway right now. Each week, we're choosing one reviewer to receive a NARM clinical protocol and NARM personality spectrum worksheet. To enter, please submit a review with an Apple Podcast and send a screenshot of your review to transformingtrauma@narmtraining.com. That's it. Winners will be chosen weekly. Thanks as always to Andrea Klunder and the Creative Imposter Studios for producing and editing, to Tori Essex for our album art, and to Brad Kammer for the creation of this podcast. We really look forward to building community and connection with you and changing the world by transforming trauma.